So I've been away on a good 3-week holiday, so I almost feel like I need to reintroduce myself. I'm Jonathan, I'm the senior pastor here at Green Lane Christian Centre. So kia ora, everybody. You know, it's good to be back with my church family. They're also aware that a whole bunch of us are away, sports camp at Totara Springs and Festival One, but we are the smart ones, aren't we? You know, we didn't join the parking lot on Friday night. We kind of stayed in Auckland to enjoy this good long weekend to celebrate our city's anniversary right here. And it's good to be back. So I had this 3-week holiday with my family, and I was chatting to the kids the other night, saying, what's the highlight of the holidays? And for my son, Chase, who's 9 years old, it was fishing. A while back, Chase took his money and he bought a fishing rod. And he thought, the holidays will be a good time to get out that fishing rod and actually go and catch something. And so he thought, to catch something, I probably need somebody wise and kind of professional in that trade to teach me about fishing. So he looked to me. Now, I know no zip about fishing, but I wanted to keep up the facade because that's what dads do, right? We kind of pretend we know more than what we do. And so I was happy to do that. So Chase took me out fishing. And I would like to say that as we kind of, cast that rod out on that first day, I'd like to be able to say that we caught something really big. I'd also like to be able to say that we just caught something, anything. But I can't say that. And it's not that the fish weren't biting, because the people on the left of us had a bucket load of fish, and the people on the right of us also had, just stacks of fish, but we caught nothing. And so I, being the professional fisherman, I wanted to kind of blame it on something else and look good in front of Chase. So I was tempted to say, well, it must be the bait, son. But the problem was we had already borrowed some of the bait from the people having success on the right, so I couldn't do that. And then I wanted to blame it on the rod, because a person always blames the tools, and maybe it's not very good. But people on the left had exactly the same rod, so couldn't do that either. And besides, there was this guy with a stick and string and hooks, and he was catching everything. So I'm like, we can't do that either. So we caught nothing. And so we tried and we tried. We tried at the wharf. We tried at the ocean. We tried casting out in the stream. It's like nothing. And so finally, a couple of weeks into our holiday, Chase decides he's going to go out fishing by himself. As if he would catch anything without me, the wise professional that I am. Within a couple of minutes, I heard Chase cheer because he caught something on his line. His first catch, I think we've got a photo up here. Chase catching. It's an eel, of course, it doesn't quite count as a fish. I'll have to say that now because I still have a bit of pride. But he caught his first thing, but without me. And so, Chase, I went to see him, helped him kind of with the eel, and he starts to teach me about fishing. Dad, this is the technique we need to have from here on. It was quite a blast to hear him talking about all the insights he now had about fishing. And as we come to our story of Jesus today in Luke chapter 5, we find this carpenter come rabbi take the professional fisherman out fishing. It's this amazing, fish story in Luke chapter 5. It begins this way. One day, as Jesus was preaching on the shore of the Sea of Galilee, great crowds pressed in on him to listen to the word of God. He noticed 2 empty boats at the water's edge, for the fishermen had left them there and were washing their nets. Stepping into one of the boats, Jesus asked Simon, its owner, to push it out of the water. So he sat in the boat and taught the crowds from there. So I kind of picture this thing, a whole massive crowd. They're kind of pressing in on Jesus. Jesus needs a little bit of space. So he asks Simon, the owner of the boat, can you take me out on the water a little bit just to get a little bit away? And I guess it forms this, it's pretty smart, it forms this natural amphitheater where Jesus can speak, project his voice, the whole crowd can hear. It's also smart for another reason. Because here's Simon, fisherman, having to be in the boat, listen to the rabbi master teach away. And even though Simon has been up, for probably the whole night fishing, he's worked hard, he's pretty tired. He's there, getting the boat in position while Jesus is preaching. And he's listening to what Jesus has to say. And then Jesus comes and if we're really honest, he invades Simon's personal space. We read, when he finished speaking, he said to Simon, remember Simon's the professional fisherman, now go out where it's deeper and let down your nets to catch some fish. So here's Jesus, the rabbi, asking Simon the fisherman to take the boat out to the deeper water, put down the nets. It's actually not even a request, it's a command. It actually sounds a bit rude. And if you think about it, it's like a pastor going out to a farm and telling the farmer how to get the best milk deal from his cows. Or that farmer talking to a surgeon about how to perform the operation. And you don't expect the surgeon to tell the teacher how to conduct the classroom. And you don't expect a carpenter come rabbi to tell the professional fisherman how to fish. But that's what Jesus does here. And Simon is well aware that Jesus is no fisherman. He's aware that Jesus was a builder come rabbi. So what does this guy know about fishing? And besides, Jesus was from Nazareth. And if you look at Nazareth on a map, if you kind of circle around it, it's in that area of the world, it's almost as far away from any water that you could possibly get. Anyone from Nazareth would know zip about fishing. And so Simon should be asking, Jesus shouldn't be asking Simon to go fishing, it should be the other way around. But Simon replies, Master, we worked hard all night, didn't catch a thing. But if you say so, I'll let down the nets and we'll try again. Now, just kind of think about what's happening here. Probably some sarcasm, probably some annoyance from Simon. I think even the way he says master or teacher. In other words, Rabbi, you're not the fisherman, you're the rabbi. Us fishermen have been working hard all night. Even that word worked hard is like our hands are like we've worked right down to the bone. This has been excruciating. But, if you want to, see how hard it is, I'll show you. Either way, he rows out the boat, lets down the nets, and you know what happens next. Verse 6. At this time, the nets were so full of fish that they began to tear. A shout for help brought their partners in the other boat, and soon both boats were filled with fish and on the verge of sinking. Now, there are some big fish stories out there, but this has to be the biggest fish story ever. Here's a catch so big that the 2 boats are on the verge of sinking because of the amount of fish that they've caught in the nets. And it all happens because Simon takes that step of obedience regardless of how he's feeling on the inside. He steps out, he listens to Jesus, even though Jesus supposedly knows zero about fishing. And Simon Peter realized what had happened. We read, he fell to his knees before Jesus and said, "Oh Lord, please leave me. I'm too much of a sinner to be around you." For he was awestruck by the number of fish they had caught, as were the others with him. His partners, James and John, the sons of Zebedee, were also amazed. Now, we're only like halfway through our story right now, but I want you to grasp this first learning, I think, for us. And it's this. Jesus invades our personal space in order to kind of reel us into this personal relationship with him. Now, if you've been reading through Luke, if you've kind of had your devotional in front of you and following the story along, you know by now that this isn't the first encounter that Simon has had with Jesus. Just a chapter earlier in Luke chapter 4, we read that Simon's mother-in-law was suffering with this high fever. So Simon asks Jesus to come to his house. Jesus steps in. He commands the fever to leave her. She gets up at once and she's healed. So Simon has seen the power of Jesus before, but for some reason, that event didn't lead Simon to following Jesus. No doubt he's impressed by Jesus. He likes his teaching, but he's not there yet. And I wonder if a lot of people are like this. They admire Jesus from a distance. They, I guess, consume what he offers. There's nothing more than that, nothing that really affects at least their day-to-day, ordinary life and working life. But here Jesus invades Simon's personal space. He invades what happens in that ordinariness of life. Jesus steps into what should be the area of strength, or what is the area of strength that Simon supposedly had, namely fishing. Simon had grown up on the lake. No doubt he learned that trade from his dad before him. He knows the best fishing spots on the lake. He knows that you're meant to go out early in the morning to catch the fish. He knows how to do it. He knows all the techniques. He's come. He's worked really hard. Simon had no doubt found his identity in his trade of fishing. This is what he did. This is who he is. This is how people brand him. And that day he caught nothing. And Jesus, who presumably should know nothing about fishing, leads Simon to the catch of a lifetime. And as Simon comes to the realization of what he's just seen in front of him, the biggest amount of fish he's ever caught, from someone that shouldn't know anything about fishing, he realizes he's in the presence of someone that is in charge of the sea. Whether Jesus kind of just, called all the fish in the ocean to kind of come, or whether Jesus just knew the fishing spot, whatever it was, he knows Jesus is in control of the sea. This should be an area of strength for Simon, but he suddenly realizes he doesn't have what it takes, and here's Jesus. And he falls on his knees before this one, and he asks Jesus to get away from him. Seems like a weird response, but it's actually a common response, isn't it? When you come face to face with your own shortcomings and failings. And I think there's elements in Simon's story that's probably true for many of us here in this room. That at one stage we had found, or thought we had found a strength and an identity somewhere. For many of us, it's in an area of our confidence, area of our expertise. And then Jesus stepped into that personal space. And suddenly things kind of broke apart. Might have been a business deal that fell apart, or it might be the stock market changed, or it might be that our health took a nosedive. And suddenly we felt just exposed. We felt naked. Our security was gone. Jesus invaded our personal space. And I think the reason he did that is to kind of reel us into this personal relationship with him. That's what he's doing here with Simon, taking him on in this area of expertise, where Simon realizes he doesn't have it. But how does Jesus respond to Simon, who just wants to run away and hide and distance himself, just like we do? It's just 3 words Jesus uses. Jesus replied to Simon, "Don't be afraid." I want you to notice that Jesus doesn't argue with Simon's statement about his own sinfulness. He doesn't say, "Simon, don't talk that way. You just need to believe in yourself. You just need to have confidence in your abilities." No, he just says, "Don't be afraid." It's actually the most common commandment in all of Scripture. Don't be afraid. Simon, I'm not here to condemn you or for you to wallow in your shame. You don't have to push me away because you're a failure. My love for you is unconditional. I wonder if the Spirit is wanting to say to some of you today, don't be afraid. Don't flee from me because of the things that you have been doing. I know that you're entangled in all sorts of silly things and you're trying to prove yourself. You're trying to find your identity, and it's just time to come clean. Might have been a Christian for many, many years, clinging to things that are keeping you from following Jesus more wholeheartedly, and Jesus is inviting you to come clean. Jesus invades your personal space because he wants to reel you into a relationship, and a deeper relationship with himself. Don't be afraid, he says to many of us this morning. But then Jesus says something else to Simon. From now on, you'll be fishing for people. And as soon as they landed, they left everything and followed Jesus. The word Jesus uses for that phrase, fishing for people, is this new word that joins 2 words at that time. So it joined the word catch and life. So it's a catch for life. Now, fishermen, typically when they throw their line out, are catching, to devour, not for life. So when Jesus says, I want you to cast that line out to catch people, I want you to catch them so they can have life, to effectively to rescue them. Because they're in this ocean, they're perishing, they're dying, they're not aware of that, but you need to cast the line out and catch this net of people. It leads me to this other idea I want us to see, that Jesus calls people not just to faith in him, but to fishing for him. Simon, what you've seen happen today with all this fish coming in this net, effectively there's an object lesson to show you what I want you to do with people. I want you to be my followers, Simon, so that you can become a fisher of people. I have a bigger agenda for your life, Simon, that goes beyond the smelly old nets that you have. If you want to be a fisher of people, it's going to require you to follow me, to learn from me day in, day out. See, often we think Christianity is all about somebody responding to the event, and it's often where it begins in somebody's journey when they step into this relationship with Jesus. Might come forward after a service, they might fill in a card, go to a room and be prayed for, and that's all fantastic. That's kind of the beginning of a journey, but there's not meant to be a full stop there. That's not what Christianity is about. Jesus doesn't just save our souls, he saves us in order to recruit us to become fishers of people, to be involved in renewing people and places and get involved in this adventure that's before us in this mission. So what happens after this massive fishing story on the shoreline? Well, we read here, Simon and his buddies leave everything to follow after Jesus. Jesus, later on in the story, changes Simon's name to Peter to signal this new beginning in his life. And then Simon Peter learns from Jesus for the 3 years of Jesus' ministry. And then Simon Peter becomes this significant leader in the early church. Nobody would have seen that coming. I mean, Simon was this fisherman. Fishermen weren't well regarded by people at that time. And yet the very first person Jesus recruits to his team is this guy, Simon. Who would ever have seen that coming? I can't imagine any of us choosing Simon on our team. Story goes on, Jesus dies, he rises again, he ascends into heaven. Just before he left, he leaves this mission to the 120 people that had been gathered around. And he gives them a mission that goes through all the generations. It's kind of this in the sequel of Acts, in the sequel of Luke's, it's called Acts, where Jesus said, you will receive power when the Holy Spirit comes upon you, and you will be my witnesses, telling people about me everywhere, in Jerusalem, throughout Judea and Samaria, and to the ends of the earth. In other words, this isn't just about Simon fishing, this is about everybody that would come to know Jesus and believe in Jesus to become fishers of people themselves. So a few days after Jesus has given this mission, Simon and a few others go out to this large crowd and they talk about Jesus. And then it's almost like Luke chapter 5 all over again as that kind of net is out and that kind of all this major amount of fish come forward. Now it's not just with fish, it's with people. Because we read on that first day in Acts chapter 2, 3,000 people were added to this new faith community we now call the church. So the church grew from 120 people to 3,120 people in one day. 2,500% growth rate in one day. I mean, this is an amazing fishing story, drawing our attention. It's like Luke chapter 5 now with people. Simon Peter has become this fisher of men, all because he followed after Jesus, was empowered by the Spirit, and allowed the Spirit to use him in his life. Now, the day after that happened, Simon Peter, catches this big intake of 3,000 people. He steps out into another crowd. This time, though, there's all these religious leaders in the crowd. And they hear Simon speaking along with his buddy John, and they get really annoyed. They have them summoned to come before them. And in the group that they're summoned to, there are some heavyweights. We read in Acts chapter 4. The next day, the council of all the rulers and elders and teachers of religious law met in Jerusalem. Annas the high priest was there along with Caiaphas, John, Alexander, and the other relatives of the high priest. They brought in the two disciples, that's Simon and John, and demanded, by what power or in whose name, what gives you the right? How have you done this? Some of these names, if you're kind of be following Luke's story, Annas and Caiaphas were among the people that arranged for the execution of Jesus. So that these are heavyweights. This is a threatening group of people. And they're not happy with the way Simon and his friends and his buddies are talking about Jesus to the crowd and, evangelizing and proselytizing. And you sit back and you kind of think about the question, why are they doing this? Because there's a lot on the line right now for Simon. If they did this to Jesus, maybe they're going to kill Simon and his buddies. So here's that question, why fish? Why potentially lose everything to do this? Simon, why can't you just be a private follower of Jesus? Why do you have to try to convert people? Just be happy in what you've experienced with Jesus yourself. Why do you have to go right into the Jewish temple and ruffle the feathers of all these religious leaders? Isn't that the way we feel at times? Most other religions aren't seeking converts. A lot of churches don't do that either. Why don't we just leave people alone? Because a lot of people aren't really wanting to talk about Jesus, wanting to even hear about Jesus. So it just kind of creates this awkwardness, doesn't it? In fact, as a church, you think about the amount of time and effort that goes into reaching people. We have all these different community ministries. We spend hundreds of thousands of dollars in providing spaces and people and staffing and all these different things in order for people to come to know Jesus and be equipped to reach out for Jesus. Why not just leave people alone? Again, it's not like people are crying out, hey, please come and tell me about Jesus. There's some, but not like everybody. But I think we start to get some answers to that question in the way Simon responds to the heavyweights right in front of him who were threatening him. In his response, Simon steps forward right in front of these people who just weeks earlier had executed Jesus, and he tells them why he's so committed to fishing for people. Listen to these words. There is salvation in no one else. God has given no other name under heaven by which we must be saved. So Simon is standing in the heart of Judaism and he says, you're wrong. And if you continue to reject Jesus, you're doomed. These are the types of comments that people hate. And if you're here and you're not a follower of Jesus, this is probably one of the things you don't like about Christianity. You don't like the whole evangelism thing, the whole idea about proselytizing people. 18 months ago, we did a survey as a church called NZ Ask God. And we heard comments like this. How can Jesus be the only way to God? When will the multitude of religions overcome ego and become aware of harmony? Somebody else wrote, aren't all religions essentially the same? And back then I shared the story that often takes place in the philosophy class at university when the professor will stand in front of students. I shared the story about the blind men and the elephant. And, he'll talk about, one blind man feels the tusks and says, the elephant is like a sharp spear. Another grabs hold of the trunk and says, no, the elephant is like a snake. Or a third man, wraps his arms around the elephant's leg and says, no, the elephant is thick and round like a tree, and so on. And each man, can only see feel part of the elephant, but doesn't get, the complete picture of the whole thing. And then the philosophy professor, steps up and he says, that's what's wrong about the religions in our world. Each one just sees part of it, but they don't see the entire picture. And then he normally makes a comment like, Christians need to stop being so arrogant to say they have all the truth. And when you kind of hear that story, it has kind of this appearance of humility in it, but you sit back and you reflect on it again, and it actually sounds quite arrogant, doesn't it? Because the person telling the story is putting himself or herself in that situation where apparently they see all of the elephant, claiming to see all the elephant in a way that the others can't see it. But how can someone claim that no religion sees the whole truth unless they themselves apparently see the whole truth while claiming that no one else can see the whole truth? You kind of follow me? They're against, any one religion claiming superiority and yet at the same time claiming that they themselves are in the superior position to kind of see it. You see, the issue is never, should we make exclusive claims? Because ultimately, everybody is making exclusive claims. And everybody is trying to proselytize and evangelize people to those very beliefs. The question every one of us has to always ask is, do those beliefs actually stack up? You see, Simon Peter here ultimately got this idea about this exclusive belief from Jesus himself, who said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one can come to the Father except through me. So when he's in front of these heavyweights who are putting the pressure on to have him silenced, Simon will reply, "Do you think God wants us to obey you rather than him? We cannot stop telling everyone what we have seen and heard." We don't have all the kind of religious answers, but we know what we've seen. We know what we've experienced about Jesus and the life he's brought to us. And we just want everyone to know that. See, they sit back and they realize that Jesus has called them to cast out the line and to fish for people. And it's important because what's on the line is people and their destinies. So what does it look like for you and me to become fishers of people? Let me finish with 4 takeaways. First, remember that we were all fish once ourselves. So what I've discovered in church is that the longer people tend to be part of a faith community like this one, we tend to forget that once we were fish and that it's really messy being fish. And we forget how messy that mission and how costly that mission can be at times. And the way Jesus wants to reach people who are often very different to us or very different maybe to the backgrounds we've had. And then he wants to recruit those very people to be ambassadors for him. So think again about some of the people that Jesus brought to himself and recruited as leaders. People like Simon, a guy with this hard exterior, a person that no one else would ever see being a leader in the church. Somebody that worked with his hands, he stunk of fish. No one wanted to be like him. And yet this is the very person Jesus called first to be a follower of himself. And there were 3 other fishermen like Simon, pretty similar backgrounds. But Jesus doesn't repel them. He seeks after them and recruits them for his mission. And it wasn't just these 4. It was prostitutes. It was financial tax collectors. There were also messed up, remember in Luke, this demon-possessed guy that Jesus frees, and then immediately he goes out to fish to his friends so that they too would come to know Jesus and the difference he's made in their life. I think of the story of the woman who had 5 marriages, and then she encounters Jesus, and she goes immediately to her village to tell people about the guy that she's just met. These are all people who responded to the grace of Jesus, responded to the way they had found life. And they went out immediately to fish for people because they wanted them to find this new life as well. You see, Jesus doesn't restrict entry to church to any particular group of people. And yet, sadly, what I find in churches at times is we tend to gather with people who are just like us. They look like us, they sound like us, they dress the same, they look the same. And over time, it's really natural and easy for us to just kind of gather with people who are just like us and we feel really comfortable. But Jesus' community welcomes everybody. Healthy churches will always kind of welcome anybody. It's why on the wall over here, one of our values is inclusivity. That we welcome people just as they are, whoever they are. It's one of the things I love about our church is the way we look so different, we sound so different, our backgrounds are so different from each other. It's the way Jesus designed healthy church communities to be. Now I'm aware there's people in our room today who aren't followers of Jesus. And perhaps somebody invited you today and that person's probably going, "Oh man, I wish this wasn't the message today. Of all messages, is this one." But you see, the reason we invite you and the reason we want you to come to know Jesus is not because we think we're better than you, but because we have received something we've been rescued ourselves. And we know what it's like to be on the other end of the line. Because at one stage we were depending on kind of security and depending on all these other things that are kind of outside of Jesus, thinking it would kind of cover us. And then as we kind of pulled the nets in, we found that they were empty. But we then met Jesus and we found that life with him, we have a net that's full and it has purpose and it has meaning and it has this peace available to us. And that journey with Jesus begins by saying a simple yes to him. You can do that right now while I'm speaking. It's no magical formula. It's just saying, "Jesus, you're here. I want to become your follower." There's another thing I think about as it relates to our fishing. It's to realize that Christian fishing is a community activity. You see, fishing back at this time was always about a team. The team would go out together, they would cast out the nets, the team would come back and they would haul in the nets. It was always with a team of other people. often when we think of fishing today, it's kind of the solo person on the wharf, casting out the line. It's changed a lot. But when we fish for people, it's always really a community event. We're not meant to do this alone. That's why throughout the New Testament, always there's this idea of becoming part of the village, becoming part of the faith community. So Paul talks about this, changes the analogy of fishing to kind of growing plants, but he says, we're only God's servants, Apollos and Paul. You're arguing over who's better, but we're just God's servants through whom you believe the good news. He says, each of us did the work the Lord gave us. I planted the seeds in your hearts, Apollos watered it, but it was God who made it grow. It's not important who does the planting or who does the watering. What's important is that God makes the seed grow. The one who plants and the one who waters work together with the same purpose, and both will be rewarded for their own hard work. See, the call of Jesus is this individual response, but then we become part of this community with others. And if you're kind of there just kind of on the wharf, trying to do your own thing, I want to invite you to kind of participate with the community. And there's different ways to be able to do that. I mean, one is just through volunteering. Here at GCC, we don't see kind of volunteering as a way of just being part of a roster and kind of ticking some kind of job that needs to be done. Rather, we see all these different ministries and these different things that happen as integral to our strategy of fishing and equipping people to fish. So you might be a part of the new generation team and help with our under fives and our knee-high army. And when somebody does that, they're not just providing help for parents in order to be able to come to services, tired, weary parents, but they're actually providing this context for young children to realize that they can trust people here, that the church is this loving community. And if they can realize that and come to realize that God loves them, we have scored a home run with our under fives. Huge thing. And just being part of that team, help welcoming parents, new parents, helping our children, providing that context, huge thing. Or you might be involved in the welcoming team. We're out in the car park. And again, it's not just because we need help in providing a car park space for people, but we actually want people to see there are people here that are welcoming. Big smiles on their faces. The first impression that our guest here would have is that they would see somebody that wants them to be part of our faith community. The way that God welcomes all of us into his family as well. These are big things. And just as we all do these things together, it's a way of community fishing. When you give in the offering bag or through automatic payments, you're part of that as well. You're funding the different community ministries that happen here, or you're funding the ways that we equip people to fish. It's part of community fishing as well. And in a few weeks' time, we'll talk about small groups and the way you can be a part of a community of people who are always thinking, what does it look like to reach out to our neighborhood, to renew people, to renew places? We could save a lot of time and finance by not fishing, but the mission of Jesus calls us to step out and not think about ourselves, but to think about the others around us. Third thing I wrote down here is that fishing for people involves the message and a messenger. You see, the reason I think a lot of us struggle with fishing is that we think we have to know all the ins and outs of fishing. But when it comes to fishing for people, it's just about the message, about Jesus, and the messenger, you and me, kind of just interacting, mingling with the fish in the ocean around us. A couple of years ago, there's a study in the UK that looked at people's reactions to Christianity. And while it was a UK study, I think the results of the survey are likely very similar here in New Zealand. And it was surprising to me about how open people are to wanting to hear about Jesus. Here's a little clip of what they found.
What do people outside our churches know about Jesus? Have they ever had a conversation with a practicing Christian about Jesus? Answers to questions like these could really help us share the most amazing news, the love of God for all of us through Jesus. So we asked, and here's what people, your friends and neighbours, said. 57% said they're a Christian. 9% are active Christians. They regularly go to church, pray and read the Bible. Useful starting place. But what do they actually know about Jesus? 21% think he's God, while 30% think he's a spiritual leader or prophet. But only 60% think he was an actual, real, historical person. Our job here is clear. Let's make sure everyone gets to hear that Jesus actually lived and walked on earth and that he claimed he was God. How are we going to do this? Well, 67% said they know one of us, an active follower of Jesus, and we're most likely to be their family and friends. But have we ever spoken to them about Jesus? 58% of those who know us have had a conversation about Jesus with us. Now that's a great start. But what do they think about Jesus after that conversation? 1 in 5 are open to knowing and experiencing more about him. That's 1 in 5 of your friends and family members, the people you know really well, who are waiting for you to talk about Jesus with them. And we found out that talking to someone who knows Jesus was really important in helping 36% of us decide to follow Jesus for ourselves. So let's talk Jesus.
So I found that really interesting. So just assume, that those stats were true here. I mean, I can't validate that, but let's just assume that 1 in 5 of the friends and family around you who don't know Jesus, actually 1 in 5 of them want to engage in a conversation. That's actually a really high statistic. Often we think that people's perception is that they don't want anything to do with it, but I think a lot of people are actually more open than we think they are. So I wonder if, on Tuesday when you head back to work after the long weekend, and people ask you, so what did you do on the weekend? That you just, naturally say, well, I did a few things around the house, got the lawns done, went to church on Sunday, then went off to the Viaduct Harbour, saw, the cool lights around the harbour bridge, and just kind of chat naturally. But you're just mentioning that, you're a Christian in that, or you head along to a church, and perhaps there's just a bit of bait on the line that somebody might go, oh, which church do you go to? And there's a bit of a dialogue that you can enter into. Or perhaps you might see some needs of people around you over the next week. That's why we have some invite little cards on your seats. They're not really for you, they're for you to take to others. There's a whole stack of them at the info desk that you can grab, just kind of keep in your wallet, in the back of your phone or something to pass out to people. But it might be that you meet somebody who's looking for an English class. So we have free English classes here that people can join through the week and just to help them learn English. Or it might be that you meet somebody who is out of work at the moment and you say, actually, our church has this free program for people who are out of work that helps with resumes. It's kind of the support group, gives you some interview techniques. Would you like to be part of that? Here's a little postcard, the details that are on there, our CAP Job Club. Or it talks about, might be some budgeting help somebody needs, and you can talk about the CAP budgeting course that we have. It might be that people are new to the area and looking for a church. Or it might be that people are actually exploring, wanting to know more about Jesus, and we have our Alpha course beginning in a couple of weeks' time. They might be new to the area and they have children and looking for a youth group, all sorts of different things. And so you have that postcard, you have that little card ready to be able to pass to people or direct them to our website and just engage in dialogue, because 1 in 5 people are likely very interested to be able to dialogue further. Final thing I wrote down here that I think we need to remember if we're going to be, fishing for people and doing that effectively, is to remember that all of us are here because someone else fished. Yes, we're here because Jesus died and rose again. Yes, we're here because the Spirit convicted us of our sin and need for Jesus. But we're also here because somebody else cast out the line to us and we responded. It might be a parent, it might be a friend, it might be a teacher, it might be somebody that was standing on the street, doing all sorts of things. But either way, we responded to them or to a whole community of people. They probably didn't have it all together. They probably weren't scholars. They probably didn't just say something out of the blue that we responded to. It was probably a bit of a journey. A lot of dialogue and friendship and tolerances and sacrifices and courage. But over time, the very fact that most of us are here is due to somebody else fishing for us. You see, Jesus invades our personal space and he reels us into a relationship with him. And then he calls us not just to faith in him, but to become fishers for him. I want to just provide a space for a moment to talk to Jesus. The band's going to come and lead us in our final song. But it's an opportunity this morning for us to say yes to Jesus. For some of you here, that might be a yes to a personal relationship with him. And it may feel to you that Jesus is starting to kind of invade your personal space and you feel a little uncomfortable. And the reason you're feeling that is because Jesus actually wants a relationship with you. He wants to be in the driving seat. He wants to bring new life and meaning and peace to your life. And if that's where you are today, I invite you just to say yes to him in the quietness of this moment. And if you do that, I encourage you to take a step towards our Alpha course. There's a table in the foyer. You can find out more about Alpha after the service. For some of you, it might be that your yes is simply saying yes to picking up the fishing rod. Yes to say, yeah, there's some people, I'm sensing that the Spirit of God is bringing on my mind and heart that I need to actually proactively step out to. That was my story this week as I was sitting with this passage and a particular name of somebody that I hadn't seen for like over a decade, and just felt I need to go and visit him and see him again. And so I did that later in the week, and I'm going to go see him again in a couple of weeks, just continually praying that the Spirit of God will use these times to kind of do something and just go before me and some of the conversations that we're having. And I believe the Spirit of God is doing that right here among us right now, bringing people to mind. So I just want to give you an opportunity to pray for them or to say yes to Jesus, whether it's yes to fishing or yes to a relationship with him this morning. Let's talk to Jesus. And so, Jesus, here we are. We want to say yes to a deeper relationship with you. And we want to say yes to holding that rod. And as a community, casting it to other people, that they would come to know you as well. Help us to fulfill this mission you have given to us of renewing people and places. Would you take our hands, our hearts, our feet, use them to fulfill this purpose. In Jesus' name, amen.